Okay, good afternoon. We'll get started in just a minute. Hartford Current, Stefanowski. Okay, so good afternoon. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. It is 4:03, a few minutes late. I was checking up some headlines from Georgia, trying to get a sense of what early voting looks like there. It's almost impossible to underestimate the impact of that Georgia election on the next 2 years. I don't see from every single policy that will potentially pass is at play right now. And it's interesting, if the Democrats take it, and all the numbers are looking like they will. Now, that doesn't mean much. Our polls are still within the margin of error, but all of these same patterns that we saw in November regular election is true. A huge surge of early Democratic votes, huge surge in minority voting. You're going to see tomorrow, where the numbers come in tonight, Republicans will be ahead until all of these early votes are counted. So it's going to be an interesting couple of days. Unlikely that we'll have some answers tonight, but if we do, it'll be interesting tomorrow talking about that. But so many things are at play with Georgia. And, the market actually rebounded today. It's up 150 points, largely because Saudi Arabia made an announcement that they were cutting back production. When they cut back oil production, the cost of oil can go up. And so that kind of helped the market a little bit. Otherwise, I was expecting a down day, primarily because the uncertainty. Remember, the markets hate uncertainty. And so the more we look at not knowing what's happening, I'm looking at the numbers in the market now, the more uncertainty, the more volatile the market's going to be, the lower it's going to go. The more certainty, after an election, for example, it may go up. In this case, my gut feeling is telling me that if the Democrats take this, the market will drop. There's nowhere to go up if the Republicans win. If it drops, the expectation will be that Biden will put forth plans to undo some of those Trump tax cuts. That'll take a year and a half to ever happen, but it's fairly likely to happen. The other thing that's actually crucial, that if the Democrats win and you're 50-50 in that Senate, is the unbelievable power that individual members have. And that can do one of two things. One is, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at comments. Good afternoon to all the people who said good afternoon. We actually have comments coming in from a few different places because we are live streamed on Brandford7.com, Guilford Atticus, and the Steve Mazzacane podcast pages. So we have some kind of variety there. That being said, I just wanted to let you know I received my extra $300 in my unemployment today. Okay, some did, some didn't. I talked to some people today who had not yet received their stimulus dollars. I do know somebody said they got a notification that the $600 stimulus payment, if you were getting it in the mail, we're going to be sent out tomorrow. So you should have that 1 or 2 days after that goes into the mail. I don't know, did anybody get the $600 directly deposited? I'm not sure if people have seen that yet. But Lorena, Happy New Year to you as well. To everybody, Happy New Year. I think I resolved that after tomorrow is the last day for the Christmas tree. Everybody knows the story of the Christmas tree if you're regular viewers. Tomorrow is 3 Wise Men's Day or something like that, and we will take it down for Thursday. Going back to Georgia, and I've been watching this pretty much all day and the impacts on the markets. And, one of two things can happen. If it's that close, one far left or far right or what have you member of either caucus can be unbelievably powerful. They can hold up any legislation they want. I think in terms of Susan Collins when it came to Obamacare, that can happen. The second thing, which I kind of hope happens, is moderates on both sides come together and become the more powerful caucus. And if that happens, then we're actually could be a sense of really good things that are positive. And so this could go crazy where nothing gets done and they're yelling at each other constantly, or it could be an opportunity for really good bipartisan moderates to take back over again and positive change to happen. In my view, the moderate view is we should undo some of the Trump tax cuts, especially after this crisis where so much money has to go out. Biden said yesterday in a rally that if the Democrats win, the $2,000 checks are in the mail. So is that in addition to the 600? We don't know. But I think the Democrats will err on the side of too much or far more money. So in general, there are reasons for many people to want the Democrats to win. If you are a deficit hawk, you may not want that to happen. In any event, we don't have much information besides the early voting numbers, which very heavily show towards Democrats, but they did in every other race too. So remember tonight, if you remember me on election night, we were looking at some of these races, and I was almost shocked on camera looking at, hold on a second, wow, these Republicans are showing numbers. And then I had to tell myself, wait a minute, all the Democrats voted early. And so we looked at, day of voting, and Republicans had leads. Ultimately, the races weren't close at all. Democrats crushed them, especially locally, because all that early voting came in. And I will maintain, I've had this conversation a few times in the last few weeks, the reason Trump is not the president after January 20th is very simple. His performance in one debate and early voting. So you had a perfect storm. He had the worst possible performance you could ever have in a debate. I remember sitting on the couch behind me thinking, what is this shit? It was a disaster. And he was a clown. And even supporters of his afterwards on social media were like, what the hell was that? That was absurd. Then you had early voting. So you had people that watched that debate, got pissed. Even some people that led to him, independents that had gone Trump earlier, that said, no way, I'm not doing this anymore. Then you missed the second debate. He got sick. He got COVID. So there was no time to make up for that. You got to the third debate, which he was much, much better. The last 2.5, 3 weeks were all Trump. And you saw it. Biden had a lead, and it got closer and closer and closer and closer to election day. But you couldn't make up the difference. Had there not been early voting and people were voting the day of, he would have been able to make up that difference. He could not make it up. That performance destroyed him. And for Democrats, you got Biden in office, but you lost seats in the House, and you did not, you could possibly take the Senate, but it will be at best tied. So interesting to think about, how these things change on the entire course of our country. Either on one debate or one night in Georgia will determine so much policy going forward. Conversely, one night 4 years ago with a shocking upset by Trump will drastically change the courts forever. 3 Supreme Court nominations and selections will drastically change the way the court looks for a long time. It's amazing how little tiny things have this massive impact going forward. But today, what I wanted to talk about more than anything was a couple days ago, Bob Stefanowski. Bob Stefanowski was a candidate for governor, kind of a surprise candidate on the Republican side, kind of came out of nowhere. Nice enough guy. I did not interview him before that race. I know that he's done a lot of good things during COVID. Him and especially his wife have been active in handing out masks, and helping people and raising food and money and those sorts of things all over the state. So I don't know if he's planning on running again. He's doing op-eds. And he's doing it in the Wall Street Journal. The first comment on the Wall Street Journal, if you're going to do an op-ed, don't do it on a site with a paywall. If you want people to read it, Wall Street Journal I am a subscriber to the Wall Street Journal, so I read it. But on a paywall, it's kind of interesting. But his op-ed was about Hartford. And it was kind of a statement on all inner cities and how they're run and the anti-democratic policies. And I want to talk about some of the things that he brings up in that op-ed today. And so, hold on one second. I'm going to pull this up. So the Wall Street Journal is basically called "What Isn't the Matter with Hartford?" Once famous as the insurance capital of the world, Connecticut's capital city is falling apart. Bob Stefanowski. And he starts with talking about how the Hartford Current is shutting down. I don't think anything in Hartford has anything to do with the Hartford Current shutting down. Hartford Current said they will publish, but its reporters and editors will no longer work the phones in its downtown offices. Journalism's a mess. So it's kind of a weird introduction to his argument. Journalism, whether it's in Hartford or Greenwich, isn't going to make a difference. Journalism is struggling. I had to change the business model for this business. We used to post 1 million articles on an online website, Brantford 7, and we drastically changed to do a podcast, do more social media postings, and going live during storms, things of that nature. We go live and bring you the news and tell you what we're doing. Also, from a revenue standpoint, we don't do ads nearly as much we do more consulting and work with people on social media management, and you see them in sponsors here. Today, the sponsor is the Cork Shop here in Brantford. So the idea that he would tie in media not working to the way the town is run is nonsense. But the first thing I want to talk about is he talks about, I'm going to read this sentence directly from his op-ed. The city spends more than $400 million annually on education, $17,260 per student, yet nearly 30% of its students don't graduate high school on time. Only 18% of students in grade 3 through 8 test at age-appropriate levels in math, and 25% do so in reading. So I've spent a lot of time on this site and in podcasts talking about education and education issues. And there's a line I used in an article probably about 3 or 4 years ago. People still bring it up to me, and it's the same thing. It's this: you can only mold the clay that you're given. This idea that the inner cities are spending too much money and not getting results has nothing to do with what government is doing. It has nothing to do with the quality of teachers. I could take teachers from Greenwich and put them in the inner city, and they will have the exact same results. Teachers in the inner city or in Hartford or New Haven or Bridgeport are not worse than or better than teachers in Madison or Greenwich or New Canaan. The clay you're dealing with, the kids you're dealing with, are coming from drastically different homes with significantly less support. And so for him to make this statement, I'm sorry, is, in my opinion, offensive. Now, there's some things I'm going to agree with him on a little bit. He's going to talk about this idea of regionalization and what Bronin, the mayor of that he discusses in Hartford, talks about. But this idea that we can keep using spending per pupil and democratic ideals or whatever they are, or the Board of Education and the policies, and say these aren't working for our kids. I don't care who you are. Economics plays a massive, massive role. Higher performance is often going to come from towns that have higher economic benefits, higher per capita incomes. Period. That's not a question. When you're dealing with a classroom with 20 kids, let's just say 20, 25 kids, and one didn't sleep last night, 3 didn't eat in the last day, 1 is dealing, or 2 are dealing with domestic violence abuse, 2 or 3 have no students coming, no parents at home at night. 1 is living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 7 people. You have, that's what's happening in the inner city. In fact, we can go a step further, even in a smaller, like Brantford. Brantford has one school district in Tisco where, for the most part, they're coming from homes that are $350 and over. Parents that make median income of $120, $130, they're doing well. They can hire tutors or somebody making sure they're getting their homework done. They have a place to sleep every night. They're not watching too much TV. They have a parent that cares and is engaged. Likewise, we have other school districts in Brantford. Good teachers. The administrators are just as good. They're not less than. The clay is different. And so to ask a teacher to say, well, you're only graduating 30% of your people, or 30% aren't graduating, or they're not up to snuff, or we're going to pretend they're not trying hard? What democratic policy is making inner city schools not be as good as Greenwich schools? Besides the fact that the clay is different. The students are coming from drastically different neighborhoods, families, social systems. How do you ask a kid to learn when he hasn't eaten in 24 hours? How do you ask a kid to learn when he slept an hour and a half the night before? When they're shooting outside his house? How? And so the statement that he makes to start off this article, one, the media thing has no application here. Doesn't matter what town the media is in. It has nothing to do with Hartford. Media is struggling. Social media has destroyed traditional media to begin with. All the ad revenue is gone. But 2, how in the world do you say, well, we're spending $17,000 a student, but we're not getting the results? As if that has anything to do with policies, Democratic or Republican. And there's likely Democrats and Republicans on their boards of education. So he starts off with really, in my opinion, almost offensive ideas that There's something being done wrong by the teachers and administration in that town that isn't being done wrong in other towns. $17,000, $18,000 per student is not significantly different than other towns. I believe other towns are in that same ballpark. The $16,000 to $18,000 per student is about normal. I don't know exactly what Brantford is. I'll look at that later on tonight. So that concept is wrong. And we need to start judging our teachers differently. A couple of years back in the state legislature, there was a huge push for accountability. And how do we measure our teachers? And how do we hold them accountable? And what testings do we use? It doesn't work at the end of the day. Because you can take the best teacher on the planet, and they will perform brilliantly in one school. In the other school, they're going to struggle. We had a candidate for first selectman who was a principal in Brantford. And he lost and he should have lost the race. He was nowhere qualified to be the first selectman. He was a former principal. People liked him, but he was a principal of Tisco. And if you don't know Brantford, Brantford has three very distinct districts. Tisco is the wealthier district. Murphy is a little bit lower, and Sliney is a little bit in between. So these test scores show that. Test scores are always highest at Tisco. That's where you likely have the most engaged parents and the most money per household. They're lower at Murphy. They're not bad. They're not terrible, but they're lower at Murphy. If you go to Fairhaven, or New Haven, or Hartford, or Bridgeport, they may be also significantly lower. Has nothing to do with the teachers. So that concept, Mr. Stefanowski has to get rid of. The real problem with this op-ed, I want to keep going a little bit here, and he goes into they've been governed by Democrats since forever. Mayor Luke Bronin embraced the progressive mantra to defund the police and reduce the city's public safety budget by $2 million or 6%. The spike in gun violence that followed required Mr. Bronin to ask Ned Lamont, also a Democrat, to send in the Connecticut State Police. Again, I don't know how Lamont being a Democrat applies there, but it is what it is. There were more than 200 shootings in the city through the first 11 months of the year, making it Hartford's most violent year in the last decade. The Connecticut Public Radio report put it bluntly: the mayor blames the explosion of gun violence on his city on COVID-19. Now, first of all, do I think COVID-19 impacted violence? Yes. You had a lot of people with not much to do. And that's a bad situation to be in. What he's leaving out of this op-ed is that violence went up everywhere. In most cities, violence went up. You had kids that weren't away to college. You had more people in the town with nothing to do, no jobs to go to. When you have people twiddling their thumbs, they find something to do, and it's almost never productive. So crime going up, to say it's on bad Democratic policies, I don't know. If you want to say it's because defund the police and he took some money from it, this isn't the first time in the history of mankind the police departments have been defunded by small amounts. 6% is not the end of the world. Do I support defund the police? No way in hell. It's a nonsense political garbage. But to pretend that Hartford is kind of, this caused X, when this has been happening all over the place during COVID, doesn't make much sense. So here's some significantly poor arguments. Now, Stefanowski, I've had issues with before. When he ran for office, he was running for office saying, we're going to get rid of the income tax. There's not a way in a million years in Connecticut we're getting rid of the income tax. It's never happening. It can't happen. The math doesn't add up. So somebody who is supposed to be fiscally responsible to say, let's get rid of the income tax, even incrementally over the next 10 years, there's no accountant on the planet that's going to look at Connecticut and say, yeah, that's going to happen. It's nonsense. So there's a bunch of things that are wrong to start off this op-ed. Then he goes into Bronin trying to regionalize. And this is where I actually agree with him a little bit more. When Bronin got in, they said, instead of putting a plan in place to correct decades of fiscal mismanagement, Mr. Bronin headed to the suburbs to pitch a zany left-wing idea. Progressives call it regionalism. Same people call it a tax grab. So we've talked about regionalism, and I have not seen Democrats as a whole adopt that policy. There are some, the far left in inner cities, that are pushing for that policy. Yes. And it's a money grab. They want to get more money from their suburbs and around those towns to pay for their things. There's no question. And there is no question that the overriding thought that Stefanowski puts forward, that we need to be more fiscally responsible, we can't just ignore. The way he goes about making these points is wrong. And that's the problem with so often on the left and the right, the messaging is nonsense. You're relegating entire detailed plans that should be in place to a bumper sticker. Democratic policy has destroyed this town. That didn't happen. So I'm going to read this. And it's an attempt to shake a state bailout from Governor Malloy. Mr. Lamont's Democratic predecessor, Mr. Bronin, drew up plans for Hartford's bankruptcy in 2017. The threat proved effective. Mr. Malloy knew what a bankrupt capital city would be a black eye for Connecticut, as it had happened in Pennsylvania in the past. So the state took on $534 million in debt. With Hartford's financial problems solved, Mr. Bronin abandoned all pretense of reform and is focused exclusively on promoting regionalism, the justification for which has lately shifted from cost savings to racial and economic equity. Completely true. The Democratic messaging on this has been, we need to solve this problem because of racism, which is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And the Connecticut Mirror, we've talked about many times, has adopted that as well. Desegregate Connecticut, a new nonprofit founded by Sarah Bronin, an architect, law professor, and the mayor's wife, claims that outdated zoning laws make the state's small towns unaffordable and therefore responsible for concentration of urban poverty. The horrible economic policies of the politicians and public employee unions who run Connecticut cities evidently has nothing to do with the condition they are in. So here's where I agree with him. This idea that zoning laws are racist and not far more focused on economics is simply political propaganda. It just is. People work hard to live in a better area. We don't have a better area if bad areas don't exist. But the state has done so much, and the federal government as well, so much to help people get out of certain situations. If it's just economics, Branford, for example, is the highest concentration of trailer parks in the state. If you wanted to go from Fairhaven to Branford to get to better school systems, you could. Period. You could. If you can afford a basic apartment in Fairhaven, you could afford a trailer. We have the largest concentration of condos. If you want to go from Fairhaven or the inner city and get out and get a condo at whatever the rent would be, you can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And quite frankly, you don't have to make a lot of money to do it. There's enough state aid. If you're a teenager and you want to go to college, Gateway is free. I went to Gateway when I first went to school as an adult at 28 years old. Almost everyone in the class was going for free. I know, we'd sit at lunch and talk about it. At the time, so many of them, this is before Obamacare, in order to stay on their parents' insurance, had to be a student. So they were enrolled, not even always taking it seriously, but they were enrolled. It was free. They stayed on the insurance. That was important to them. So at the end of the day, this idea that it's zoning that's racist, when the state is giving significant opportunities for people to get out of those cities. And the ridiculous nonsense with this affordable housing crap and all this ridiculous bullshit that comes from the Connecticut Mirror is that you're taking the average cost of these higher, wealthier towns and creating affordable housing. So corporations get rich giving affordable housing for $1,800 a month. It doesn't make any sense. So there's things that Stefanowski makes that are dead wrong. Attacking teachers and student funding as if where that kid is coming from doesn't matter is nonsense. But the same thing is true with housing and this desegregation argument. There's far more at play socially in that household, in the household dynamics, than just economics or just race. And it's easy for inner city politicians to yell and scream, it's racism. It's not. There are serious, serious issues going inside those households. We can't help everyone. We can't keep throwing numbers at the wall saying, this is awful, we need to fix this. There are people who aren't going to be helped. That's the reality. We're not going to ever be at 100% homelessness gone. We're not going to be 100% above the poverty. It's never going to happen. Because there's far more at play than racism or economic diversity. People that have opportunities aren't taking them. People that are going to school for free aren't going to classes. People that have access to food are still eating junk. You can't change behaviors of everyone. The inner city politicians are after more money. We get that. Stefanowski is right. At the same time, he makes his point extremely poorly. Teachers can't fix that. And so it's an interesting op-ed because the Hartford Courant came back with their response, and their response is actually quite good. And they quote from the governor of, the first selectman of, I'm going to read this to you, and she ran for office too and lost, Erin Stewart. I like Erin Stewart in New Britain. And she has a great quote here. It says, "There is no question that there are real, often insidious and systemic problems that have plagued Connecticut cities for decades. Bob, or whoever does his writing," there's a little attack, "has correctly identified several critical areas in this piece. But pointing out problems is the easy part. Actually solving problems is the mark of a true leader." I could not agree more. By throwing this out and attacking just random broad attacks on democratic policies or spending per student or this idea of regionalization, he has not provided one concrete solution for anything. And this is how he ran 3 years ago. Get rid of the income tax? And then when you asked him how, he would, in the debate, well, who in here doesn't believe we can save 10% just by looking at it? Yeah, I don't believe you can save 10% just by looking at spending. And you've had time to give us your ideas. I'm glad Mr. Stefanowski is out handing out masks. I'm glad he's out helping raise money for nonprofits, that he's raising food for people that need it during COVID. I'm glad he and his wife are doing that. They are a great example. That's phenomenal. But you've had time now to come up with real solutions for the problem. And instead, as we drown, he's describing the water. It's time for Mr. Stefanowski to throw a life raft. If you have something concrete to offer, if you have something of value to offer, if you have a solution to offer, offer it already. If you're going to sit down and write an op-ed, don't tell us how bad things are. Tell us what you would do differently. So at the end of the day, nothing in this article gets us any closer to solving any of the problems. And he targets Hartford without saying, here's what I do differently. Where is the 3-point plan? And actually a doable plan, not let's get rid of the income tax. Because I don't know how getting rid of the income tax would help Hartford's problems right now. Some of these, Mary, with COVID, our children in the cities are losing even more ground in education. A friend who is a retired teacher and now a literacy specialist in New Haven says many of these students should repeat. The families don't have the extra monetary support our higher income towns have to assist their children with education needs. Absolutely correct. And I will tell you this, I learned this from experience. When I took my initial classes at Gateway, I was 28 years old and I took those first classes. And we had like math 067. And so at first, because I was an adult going back, I was supposed to take some test, like an aptitude test, excuse me for a second. And I didn't, I missed that day. So I had to go to the first class of this 067. I kid you not. After one class, they said you can move on to, I was like to 198 or something like that, but whatever it was like basic addition. You had kids graduating high school, didn't know basic addition. And it's just, let's push them on. Let's just push them on. And so we have these, the state looks at graduation rates and who's getting through. Nothing is saying they're getting through in actual education. Having a high school diploma does not mean you know how to do basic things. And so now Gateway and colleges have to create prereq classes to prereq. Never mind math 110, which is the basic level college math. It's 067. It's sophomore high school level math. Because those students have no idea. They have not been taught what to do. So what do you do if you're a teacher at that school district? Do you keep them until they're 23? If that kid lives in a terrible household, and I told a story a few months back of a situation in Branford where we found out, that kid, the safest part of that kid's day was when they were in school, because otherwise it was a disaster at home. That's common. especially in the inner cities and in Brantford too, by the way, and in the suburbs. We're not above that by any means. But yes, these kids are being pushed on. They have no potential, but we give them all the tools are there. We're going to pay for college. We're going to pay for high school. We're going to give you food stamps to get through it. We're going to help you with rent assistance. All these things are there. It's still at some point is up to that family and that person to use them. And we can't always say, well, it's not working, so therefore we need more money, because no amount of money is going to change that. If there's a family in downtown, not downtown, but in Fairhaven, in the worst section of New Haven, that is able to work, and they want to get out of that area, there's places for them to go. Period. There is. There is enough assistance for them to get out. It exists. So maybe we have to do better at informing them of that. I think we certainly have to do a better job of getting people, this idea that they're getting aid, but can't work because if they earn too much money when it's a small amount, they no longer get the aid. So there's this huge weird void that people are in where, and I've seen women say that, like a single mother, say, I live in this apartment, I get state aid, I get food stamps, I can't make more than $1,200 a month or I lose that. That's crazy. That's just nuts. So there are changes that need to be made, but there are opportunities for people. And we can't, when people don't take advantage of those, just yell and scream, we need more money. Kathy, the Hartford Courant comment was about them working remotely, no longer working in the downtown office, which is riddled with crime, had nothing to do with the closing. Based on the Courant, who I know at the Courant, it does have something to do with them closing. But yeah, crime in Hartford is not new. It may be a little higher, but it's not new. Revenue by growth. Listen, there's a lot of revenue by growth. All right, so Brantford probably got a little bit lucky where people from New York are coming in, buying our houses. Our property values in the next couple of years will go up because of those sale prices. Yes, that can happen. But in general, you have to be an active participant in the economy to benefit from growth. If you're not working, if you're not furthering your career, if you're not pushing education, if you're not taking advantage of all of those steps, I don't care how much the economy grows, those people are not going to be helped. It just doesn't happen. So we can talk about growth all the time. Middle class, even upper lower class, middle class and higher will all benefit. But that bottom rung, that for whatever reason, social, household issues, no fathers involved, no money in the household, domestic violence, drugs, whatever the reason is that they're not taking advantage of the opportunity, they're not going to see any benefits because that economic benefit comes for those who are active participants in the economy. Period. Renee, it's ridiculous. Not everyone is college material. That is okay. Quit moving kids along when they cannot reach basic levels of achievement. And the question is, what do you do then? And I don't know the answer to this question. If you are a teacher or a principal in inner city Fairhaven, let's say, and you have students as a freshman in high school that cannot graduate, just can't, like they don't know basic math, they can't learn their 50 states, whatever it is. And you keep them back and new students come in. And the next year you keep back 30 students and the new students come in. Next year you keep back another 30 students. The new students, you don't have classrooms big enough for these students. What do? You build bigger schools, hire more teachers. If one student, I will tell you this, and you can talk to any teacher and they will verify this. The vast majority of classrooms of 25 kids, 3 kids take up 85% of that teacher's time. And almost every teacher will tell you the same thing. 3 kids that they're spending forever with to teach or whatever, and they can also hold up the progress of the rest of the class. So the teachers end up saying, just move them on. Otherwise, you just, what do? Are you going to have 24, 25-year-old kids in high school? The issues with the inner city are real. The problem is, if we relegate it to where it's regionalized as some sort of concept to raise more money, it's not going to happen. The fact that a problem exists doesn't mean the problem could be solved. What's happening inside people's homes, the domestic situation they have, the family situation they have, which are in often cases awful, are not something we can change with fiscal policy. Politicians want to because they want more money. right? Every single time a town gets a grant, that politician, and we got a $10,000 grant for sidewalks and a $5,000 grant for this school, and we got $90 million for this school. They love talking about how we got money to that town. And the politicians for the inner city want to do the exact same thing. The mistake we're making is pretending that more money is going to solve that problem. The mistake Stefanowski's making is also saying, well, the problem with students and a low graduation rate is democratic policies. No, it's not. Many of the problems are things we cannot fix. We can't fix what happens in people's homes. It's never going to happen. This is not a problem that will go away. It will always be there. The question is how we manage it. All right, that's my rant for today for the most part. Thanks for joining me again. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll have some information on the Georgia outcome, which is huge and massive for the next couple of years. And if we get some sense of where that's going, we could talk about potential impacts and different policies that we'll see going forward based on whether it's Republican controlled or Democratic controlled. That being said, guys, thanks so much for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. One of my New Year's resolutions is to not cancel so often. So I will be back on tomorrow. I swear it. I promise you, unless something serious happens. And I will see you then. So guys, thanks for joining me, and I hope you all have a great